So I want you to think about the last time you took a photo of yourself. Like, really try to picture that exact physical moment,
Oh, yeah. The whole routine.
right? You raise your phone, you probably check the lighting, and then you make a conscious choice.
Yeah.
Maybe you tilt your chin down a bit, or you put on that very specific, slightly serious work face you use for LinkedIn.
Which is, I mean, it's completely different from the relaxed face you use for your weekend social media posts.
Exactly. We all do this. We constantly adjust our image depending on the audience we're expecting. But the core premise of today's deep dive is going to take that everyday habit and push it to its absolute extreme.
It really does.
What if every single photograph you took of yourself wasn't actually a record of who you are, but a mirror reflecting the hidden role society expects you to play?
It is a deeply unsettling concept when you really sit with it. Because, we naturally assume a photograph is a document of reality. We trust the camera.
Yeah, we think a photo is the truth.
Right. So the idea that a lens might not capture the truth, but rather expose the masks we're wearing, it challenges our entire relationship with images.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. Our sources today are pulling us into the life, the psychological mechanisms, and just the monumental cultural impact of photographer Cindy Sherman.
One of the greats.
Truly. And our mission today is to explore how this single artist completely dismantled the centuries-old idea of photography as objective truth. She took a machine designed to document reality, and, well, she re-engineered it into this wild theater of identity and cultural critique.
When you look at the landscape of late 20th century art, I mean, Sherman's influence is just foundational. She completely shifted the paradigm of what a photograph fundamentally is.
But the entry point into her massive body of work is always this central paradox, right?
Exactly. The paradox is that she is the physical model in almost all of her photographs, yet none of them, not a single one, are self-portraits.
Okay, I have to say, I'm struggling to see the hard line there. Like, if I put on a wig, adjust some lighting, and take a photo of myself, I'm still just taking a picture of myself in a wig. Why is her work categorically different from just, an elaborate self-portrait?
I get that. It sounds contradictory. But a self-portrait is usually an attempt to reveal the artist's inner psychology or their personal identity.
Right, like showing the real you.
Yes. And Sherman does the exact opposite. She uses her own face and body purely as a blank canvas to construct a total fiction. She completely erases Cindy Sherman, the individual, from the frame.
Oh, wow. So she's just the raw material.
Precisely. The character she plays, a bored housewife, an eager secretary, a tragic movie star, they aren't her. They are cultural archetypes. They're these standardized, mass-produced stereotypes of women that we've all internalized from decades of consuming magazines and television and movies.
That makes a lot of sense. So to understand how someone even arrives at that concept, we kind of have to look at her early life.
We do.
She was born in 1954, grew up in Long Island, and she was the youngest of 5 kids. And her defining childhood obsession was dressing up, just rummaging through old clothes, putting on heavy makeup, and physically transforming into different characters in her house.
And that instinct to inhabit an entirely different persona, it never really faded. It just, found a more sophisticated outlet later on.
Like an early analog version of a virtual reality headset. Just a way to step into entirely different lives right in her bedroom.
That is a perfect analogy. And so in the early 1970s, she enrolls at Buffalo State College. Initially, she was actually studying painting.
Wait, really? Not photography?
No, painting. But it quickly became this profound source of frustration for her. The medium just felt too rigid. She felt weighed down by centuries of the quote-unquote masters of art history telling everyone what a portrait should look like.
I can imagine. It's a very heavy legacy to deal with.
Exactly. Because painting requires the artist to observe a subject and translate it onto a blank canvas. But Sherman didn't want to paint the canvas. She wanted to be the canvas.
Which brings her to photography. And the timing and location here are just critical. Buffalo in the mid-1970s was an absolute hotbed for the avant-garde.
Oh, completely.
Experimental video art, conceptual performance pieces. She even co-founded an alternative art space called Hall Wall's Contemporary Art Center. But at that time, photography wasn't really seen as a major fine art, was it?
No, not at all. It was still largely viewed by the establishment as a secondary art form, something purely documentary, unlike painting or sculpture.
So it was almost like a lesser medium in their eyes.
Right, but that perceived limitation is precisely what gave her the freedom to innovate. Photography allowed her to merge performance, costume, and staging into a single captured moment.
And we really see this coalescing early on, right? Like in that 1976 project, Bus Riders II.
Yes. She photographed herself as various passengers you'd encounter on a typical city bus. So she's an elderly woman, a blue-collar worker, a young student.
She wasn't capturing reality. She was realizing that reality itself could be manufactured right in front of the lens.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, she is figuring out the controls of this new medium. And armed with it, she completely dismantles the traditional relationship between the photographer, the model, and the viewer.
Which brings us to the birth of staged photography. Let's unpack this for everyone. This isn't a street photographer waiting for a candid moment to happen.
Not even close. Staged photography means literally nothing is spontaneous. The lighting, the specific location, the subtle body language, the era-specific costume, every single molecule inside the frame is a meticulously built narrative.
So she's obliterating the boundary between the person behind the lens and the person in front of it. She's the director, the actor, the set designer, and the photographer.
All at once. It's like a one-woman Hollywood studio.
It really is.
Yeah.
And we have to place this total control within the context of the feminist art movement of the 1970s. Because historically, visual culture, classic Renaissance paintings, Hollywood films, modern ads, it positioned women largely as passive objects.
Yes, they were created by male artists and male directors for what the film theorist Laura Mulvey famously termed the male gaze. The camera was traditionally this predatory tool used to look at women.
But by being both the creator and the subject, Sherman effectively hijacks that entire system. She takes total, uncompromising control of the gaze.
She builds the stereotype, steps into it, and then forces us to look at the artificiality of the whole construct.
And the result is this haunting sense of familiarity. Like when you look at her early work, you feel this visceral recognition. You feel certain you know the woman in the photograph.
Or you feel like you've definitely seen the movie she's starring in. Even though neither the woman nor the movie actually exists, you're essentially staring at a cultural ghost.
I love that phrase, a cultural ghost. Let's actually step inside some of the visual worlds she created to see how that ghost operates.
Yeah.
Starting with the project that really cemented her legacy, the Untitled film stills.
Shot between 1977 and 1980. These are just iconic.
Yeah, 69 black and white photographs that perfectly mimic the visual texture of like 1950s and 60s European art house cinema or Hollywood B-movies.
The atmosphere relies so heavily on cinematic framing. In one image, you have a woman standing alone on a dark, empty street. She's looking anxiously over her shoulder, illuminated by this really harsh streetlight.
Very Hitchcock.
Extremely Hitchcock. Or in another one, a young, blonde secretary is standing in this claustrophobic apartment. There are scattered papers everywhere, and the camera is angled slightly downward to make her appear vulnerable.
Or there's that mysterious figure looking out over a sprawling city skyline, and her face is entirely obscured. They function almost like a visual Trojan horse.
How do you mean?
Well, the lighting, the film grain, the vintage clothes, they invite you in because they look so comfortably familiar. It feels exactly like a paused VHS tape of a movie you know. But because there is no actual movie, the narrative tension never resolves.
Right, you're just left hanging.
Did she just commit a crime? Is she waiting for someone? Is she being hunted? Sherman never provides the answer. She forces you, the viewer, to project your own internalized movie onto the image.
And that mechanism relies entirely on our conditioning. The only reason you can project a narrative so effortlessly is because she is embodying the exact cinema cliches we've all been fed our whole lives.
The woman in peril, the innocent girl in the big city, the femme fatale.
Exactly. By isolating these tropes, she exposes how cinema has literally programmed our brains to view women within these highly specific, restricted narrative boxes.
It's brilliant. So, having mapped the territory of black and white cinema, she pivots sharply to print media. In 1981, she's commissioned by Artforum magazine to create a new series.
The Centerfolds.
Yes, the Centerfolds.
Okay.
Visually, we transition from these small, grainy black and white prints to massive, horizontal, full-color photographs.
Yeah.
She mimics the exact layout and dimensions of the Centerfolds you'd find in men's magazines. But the magazine actually pulled the commission. They completely censored it.
They pulled it because she deeply subverted the psychological expectation of that specific format.
Right, because what does a traditional centerfold look like?
In a men's magazine, the woman is posed explicitly for the viewer's pleasure. She's usually making direct, inviting eye contact. She's welcoming the gaze. But Sherman's women in this series, they're lying down, utilizing that horizontal space, but they look incredibly vulnerable.
They're fully clothed.
Fully clothed. Their postures are defensive. Their expressions read as deeply anxious, terrified, or just completely withdrawn. And most importantly, they are pointedly looking away from the camera.
So what does this all mean for the person looking at the photo? She uses the exact format designed for male pleasure, but makes the subject look terrified. That must have felt like a trap for the viewer.
It was absolutely a trap. What's fascinating here is she weaponizes the visual language of pop culture against itself. You open a magazine expecting a fantasy, and instead you feel like an intruder stumbling upon a private moment of distress.
Yeah, she shatters the reflection just enough to manufacture severe discomfort. The power dynamic shifts entirely. You realize your gaze is invasive, and the image makes you feel guilty for looking.
It's a brilliant critique. And that transition from cinema to modern print media feels like a very natural evolution. But by the late 1980s, around 1988 to 1990, she realizes that pop culture is just a modern symptom of a much older visual hierarchy.
So she goes after the museum itself.
Yes. With her history portrait series, she tackles the visual style of Renaissance and Baroque portraiture.
We're talking about those massive oil paintings of aristocrats, monarchs, and religious figures you see lining the halls of the Louvre.
Right, but her methodology changes drastically here. She recreates these historical compositions using heavy, intentionally obvious prosthetics.
Like fake plastic noses and grotesque theatrical makeup.
Yeah, and cheap synthetic fabric standing in for grand silk drapery.
But wait, if she's using cheap fabrics and plastic noses, isn't that just a parody? Like a glorified sketch making fun of old paintings? I mean, why wouldn't she try to make the illusion seamless?
Because the visible seams are the entire point of the critique. Art history has historically been a tool used to cement power, status, and wealth. A grand oil painting was essentially an ancient PR campaign.
Oh, like saying, I am important, my power is divine.
Exactly. By recreating these images with cheap theatrical props and obvious, uncanny prosthetics, Sherman mocks the inherent authority of the institution. She's pointing out that these classical portraits were never objective records of an individual soul. They were always highly constructed, artificial images designed to project power.
The fake nose forces you to see the artificiality of the original painting.
Exactly.
That is so smart. And then that concept of the mask becoming visible takes a genuinely terrifying turn in the early 2000s. Specifically 2003 and 2004 with her Clowns series.
Oh, the clowns. The visual shift here is incredibly jarring.
It really is. We move away from those muted historical tones and suddenly we are bombarded with violently intense, brightly colored clown costumes.
Terrifyingly heavy grease paint.
And these wild, digitally manipulated neon backgrounds. The aesthetic is deeply aggressive.
It is. Historically, the clown is a figure that straddles that razor-thin line between comedy and horror. And for Sherman, the clown becomes a mechanism to explore modern societal dread.
Like the anxiety hiding underneath the entertainment.
Yes, beneath the intense, brightly colored mask of constant amusement that society demands, there's this lurking, terrifying anxiety. And the shift to digital backgrounds is crucial here too.
Because it flattens the image.
Right, it removes any natural depth. It creates this inescapable synthetic environment where the performance of happiness has just become completely manic.
It visualizes the modern condition of smiling through the pain, but like dialed up to a nightmare level. And that exploration of the masks we wear to survive perfectly bridges into her society portraits from 2008.
Another massive visual shift.
Yeah. Here she photographs herself as wealthy, aging women. They are drenched in expensive designer clothes, massive jewels, and very heavy, almost spackled-on makeup.
These images feature women who are desperately trying to maintain their youth and their grip on social power. On the surface, the lighting and framing project immense wealth and influence.
But she captures this heartbreaking fragility in their eyes and in the profound stiffness of their poses. Though, dressing up as aging, wealthy women in heavy makeup, I have to ask, it sounds inherently mocking, almost cruel. How is that a profound statement on identity rather than just, punching down at a specific demographic?
It's a fair question, but it avoids cruelty because of the deep empathy embedded in the performance. Sherman isn't mocking the women themselves, she's exposing the brutal demands of the society they live in.
So it's about the pressure they're under.
Yes. It reveals how social status, much like gender or youth, is ultimately just another fragile artificial performance. It requires constant, exhausting maintenance. The melting makeup and those tight, anxious expressions, they show the sheer toll of keeping the mask from slipping.
That's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And her ability to dissect these mechanics of identity. It didn't just shake up the art galleries in the 80s and 90s. The philosophy underlying her work essentially functions as the blueprint for how we navigate visual culture today.
The ripple effect on contemporary photography alone is monumental. By proving that photography could be a conceptual tool for creating cinematic staged worlds, she completely broke the seal on what the medium was allowed to do.
Like paving the way for artists like Jeff Wall or Gregory Crutzen.
Absolutely. They're massive, meticulously constructed, movie-like photographs with enormous lighting budgets and complex sets. They owe a direct conceptual debt to Sherman's early experiments in her apartment.
And she provided a new vocabulary for the massive wave of identity politics art that emerged in the following decades, too.
Right. By fusing performance art with the camera, she demonstrated that identity isn't a fixed biological reality, it's a cultural script that can be rewritten. Artists utilize that framework to explore not just gender, but race, class, and sexuality.
And that influence bled heavily out of the fine art world and permanently altered commercial pop culture, didn't it?
It did. Fashion photography completely transformed. Instead of the traditional approach of simply showing a conventionally beautiful model in a dress against a seamless backdrop, fashion editorials became highly cinematic.
They became character-driven narrative experiences.
Largely because Schumann proved that audiences respond so strongly to the psychological tension of a staged scene.
But, I think the core sociological takeaway is how her work actually predicts our daily lives today. Think about our social media feeds. Aren't we all just doing a mini Cindy Sherman project every single day?
We really are.
We curate our outfits. We literally stage our backgrounds, moving a plant into the frame or hiding the messy laundry. And we perform a highly specific, curated identity for our followers.
She was a prophet of the digital culture age decades before the technology even existed. Long before Instagram or TikTok, she recognized that we are surrounded by a suffocating density of media images.
Images that dictate the invisible rules of how we should look.
How we should act, and what narratives we are allowed to occupy. Her photographs function as a decoder ring for all of that. They teach us how to read the visual matrix we inhabit.
She basically took the camera, the ultimate machine invented to capture objective truth, and used it to prove that our identities and the images we constantly consume are often just meticulously crafted fictions.
And that framework leaves us with a really profound question regarding the trajectory of our current technology.
No, definitely. In today's world of AI-generated images and digital deepfakes, where we can literally synthesize any face or background with a few keystrokes.
Right. Does Cindy Sherman's highly physical analog method, manually putting on a wig, applying grease paint, physically stepping into a character, does that actually capture something more raw and fundamentally true about the human condition than the flawless, frictionless digital masks we wear today?
That is a deeply unsettling thought to leave on. We assume the digital world gives us infinite freedom to be ourselves, but maybe just gives us far more efficient, invisible ways to hide.
Something to think about.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you walk past a billboard, scroll past an ad, or even frame up your next selfie, take a second look. Question the mechanics of the image. And maybe ask yourself, what character are you choosing to play today?